Hello, welcome to today's webinar titled From Planning to Practice, Advancing Adaptation Implementation in Canada's Natural Resource Sectors. This is the fourth and final webinar in the series. Today's session is focused on the mining sector. My name is Suzanne Sealing. I'm a project manager with the Climate Risk Institute. I'll be today's presenter and facilitator. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that I live and work on the traditional lands of the Adaptation, Anishinaabeg, and Wahnapitae First Nations within the Robinson Huron Treaty Territory. I honor the enduring presence of Indigenous peoples on this land and their continued stewardship of it. For today's webinar, I have my colleague and project partner, Charmin, who will provide support. Charmin and I will be available during the webinar if you run into audio or technical issues. To ask us a question, open the chat box and using the drop-down arrow, locate Suzanne Sealing or Charmin de Laruba, and you can send either one of us a message. There is a dedicated Q&A session, but that doesn't mean you have to hold your questions until then. Please feel free to type them out during the presentation in the chat box. We are recording the webinar today and we'll send out a link to everyone who has registered, along with a copy of the presentation slides. For those of you who are less familiar with us, the Climate Risk Institute is a nonprofit, academically affiliated organization. Our team delivers services focused on advancing practice in areas of climate change risk assessment, adaptation planning, policy evaluation, and resiliency. We run programs and develop and coordinate projects to mobilize knowledge, improve capacity, and increase climate resilience across different sectors and regions of Canada. We work closely with many partners across the country and internationally, and leverage the knowledge and skills of a strong group of associates. Let's take a few minutes to go over what we'll be covering in today's webinar. So first, we will start by asking the question of why we're focusing specifically on adaptation implementation. A lot of great work has gone into climate risk assessments and planning in the mining sector, but implementation is where things often get stuck. So we'll talk about why it's so important to move from plans and strategies to action on the ground and what that looks like in the context of mining. Then we'll provide an overview of the Implementation Insights project. This will provide some background on where this work comes from, and it's part of a broader initiative that's being focused on other natural resource sectors in Canada. Next, we'll introduce the online peer learning group that this webinar is a part of. This community is designed to connect practitioners, researchers, and policymakers who are working on adaptation in different contexts. We'll talk about how you can get involved, share your own experiences, and continue these conversations beyond today's session. We will also hear a pre-recorded presentation from Niharika Bendaru, community lead at Canadapt. She will tell us about the hosting platform and provide information on a mining sector practitioner network. After that, we'll share some early findings from the project, and then we'll spend a good portion focusing on your lived experiences and insights. You'll have a chance to share what's working, what challenges you faced, and what supports you think are most needed to move forward in the mining sector. So that's our roadmap for today. By the end, we hope you'll leave with new insights, connections, and maybe a few ideas to bring back to your own organizations. Without further ado, let's get started. So let's set the stage by clarifying what we mean by climate change adaptation implementation and why this phase is critical for strengthening climate resilience. Climate change adaptation implementation is the step within the broader adaptation planning process where planning turns into action. So this is where the strategies go on the ground to reduce risk and build resilience. It's part of the continuous cycle of adaptation planning, which starts with understanding impacts, planning responses, implementing solutions, and learning from experience. This is an iterative process that you return to see what's been working and what needs adjustments. While Canada has made strong progress in assessing risks and developing plans, implementation is still lagging. Many strategies remain on paper with limited resources and coordination to bring them fully to life. Now let's talk about the distinction between the planning and implementation phases of climate change adaptation in the mining sector. As briefly mentioned, adaptation planning aims to understand what needs to change and why before investing in on-the-ground measures. Adaptation planning in the mining sector involves assessing climate vulnerabilities, identifying key risks to operations and infrastructure, setting resilience goals, and prioritizing actions that support the long-term sustainability of mining activities and surrounding communities. Typical activities in the planning phase of adaptation may involve conducting climate vulnerability and risk assessments for mine sites, transportation corridors, processing facilities, and supply chains. It may also involve integrating climate projections and risk data into mine design, water management, tailing storage, reclamation planning, and investment decisions. It may also involve engaging stakeholders, including mining companies, regulators, indigenous governments, local communities, and industry associations to co-develop adaptation strategies and resilience pathways for the sector. Okay, and then complementary to that is the adaptation implementation phase. So, as I spoke about, this moves from the strategy to the practice. So, this is doing the adaptation work. And this involves operational changes, infrastructure investment that reduce climate risk and strengthen the adaptive capacity of mining operations. Everything from exploration, extraction, processing to transportation and reclamation. Some examples of activities for that would fall under implementation in the mining sector may involve upgrading or retrofitting the mine infrastructure itself, so the tailing storage facilities, for example. And one example is something called dry stacking. The Meliadine gold mine in Nunavut actually moved toward dry stacking its tailings to improve resilience against climate change. So this process involves dewatering the tailings mechanically to form a stackable cake rather than storing them in a slurry behind a dam. So this would reduce the risk of dam failure from increased rainfall. Another example of implementation may be water management and conservation measures to address changing precipitation patterns, drought risk, or water scarcity. So, for instance, some mines have installed closed loop systems to continuously recycle and reuse their processed water. This drastically reduces freshwater intake. It can reduce water consumption by up to 70%. Another example is for on permafrost stabilization. So in cold climates, something called thermosiphons are used as foundations to maintain frozen ground by extracting heat from the ground and then releasing it into the cold air above. So on the implementation side, mining companies may be tracking ground temperature and permafrost stability over time using sensors and remote sensing data to detect changes in the subsurface conditions. In that picture there, it's a digital thermistor string and a direct to orbit data loggers. These were used to monitor the thermosiphons that were installed in a new terminal services building at the Iqaluit International Airport. So this monitoring system assessed the performance of the thermosiphons under the buildings, which were designed to keep the foundation frozen and reduce the risk of settlement changes, which can be very costly in damage. Uh, those are some examples. Okay. Sorry, just wanna make sure. So mining operations are both affected by climate change and they're critical to how we respond. So providing the minerals and materials needed for clean energy technologies, infrastructure, and resilient supply chains. That's why moving from planning to implementation, actually putting adaptation measures in place is so essential. And across Canada, we're seeing how wildfires, flood storms, and heat waves are disrupting mining operations. For instance, wildfires in Western provinces have forced mining evacuations and temporary shutdowns. I just have to let some people in. Okay, and then, complementary to that is the adaptation implementation phase. So in cold climates, something called thermosiphons are used as foundations to maintain frozen ground. This is designed to keep the foundation frozen and reduce the risk of Not sure why the doesn't finish. And then we've also seen, intense storms and flooding, and these damage access roads, tailing facilities, and processing sites. As mentioned before, permafrost thaw and extreme temperature shifts in northern regions are having a major impact on the stability of infrastructure, and that's leading to increased costs and maintenance as well. And then you have the human health effects as well. So prolonged heat waves affect worker safety, water availability, and even the performance of equipment. So adaptation isn't a draft concept. It's really about keeping workers safe, protecting assets, and ensuring production continuity as climate risks intensify. We also have to acknowledge that mining underpins Canada's economy and the transition to a low carbon future. From critical minerals to community employment, the mining sector supports regional economies, infrastructure, and our national prosperity. So when these systems are disrupted, you can imagine the ripple effects that this has on supply chains, revenues, and even local livelihoods. Um, there's also in the mining sector a major component of public trust and a commitment to environmental responsibility. Canadians expect that mining operations are safe, sustainable, and resilient even under extreme conditions. So implementing adaptation measures is really how the sector will help deliver on that expectation. All right. So why are we doing this work? Well, we received support from Natural Resource Canada's Climate Change Adaptation Program, and the project's called Implementation Insights. It runs from started in 2024 and runs until December of 2026. The Climate Risk Institute is leading this work, and the project is focused on advancing climate adaptation implementation in three natural resource sectors in Canada. So that's forestry, energy, and of course, mining. And this project is looking at what really drives or hinders action. So, as I mentioned before, there's a lot of great work that's been documented on the planning side, but we're hearing a lot of barriers to moving those plans to action. And so this project really sets out to determine why, what's helping um, organizations succeed and what might be holding them back. And then ultimately, we would like to turn all this insight into practical tools to help close this gap. Um, and ideally, at the end of the project, we aim to have sector-specific products. We're not too sure what that looks like just yet, and we will be turning back to you, the users, future users, for some ideas and feedback on that next year. This slide outlines the key components and outputs of our work. So at the project onset, we developed a national framework and catalog to define and categorize what we mean by adaptation drivers, enablers, and barriers in the three focus sectors. And then after that, we identified and analyzed and compiled 30 examples of adaptation implementation in forestry, energy, and mining. We're currently in the process of engaging with sector experts, practitioners, and professionals to sort of confirm what we have identified, confirmed our preliminary list of drivers, enablers, and barriers, and then refine it based on your real world experience. Another output is to launch a cross-sector online community. This is a peer learning community that we hope will continue to function and thrive after the project officially ends next year. We're hoping that it provides supports collaboration and continued learning on this. Um, and then in the final year, so next year we'll, work on summarizing our key findings and our strategies, and we will work on a list of recommendations and then those sector support resources, like I mentioned. One of the key outputs is this online peer learning community called Advancing Adaptation Implementation in Natural Resource Sectors. Now, this is open to all natural resource sectors, not just the three that this project focuses on. And it's hosted on the CanAdapt platform. It's designed to bring together professionals working across all the sectors to tackle the challenges of turning adaptation planning into action. Uh, it's free. It's completely open to anyone interested in making progress on climate change adaptation. I will include a link in our follow-up email for you to click on it. And next, we have a pre-recorded video presentation from CanAdapt's community lead, Niharika. So we'll just play that for you.
Welcome and thank you for joining. I'm Niharika Bandaru, the community lead for CanAdapt, and today's presentation is about the Mining Practitioner Network under the CanAdapt platform. We're inviting you to take part in a national community focused on climate resilience in Canada's mining sector. Climate risks are increasing, threatening mining infrastructure and requiring coordinated solutions. What we've identified is that to build responses sector-wide, we need a system where mining leaders, policymakers, researchers, and practitioners can connect and collaborate, exchange knowledge, and co-create strategies and innovative practices that support adaptation and resilience in the mining sector. So how does CanAdapt fit into all of this? CanAdapt is a national platform hosted by the Climate Risk Institute and the Resilience by Design Lab at Royal Roads University, and it's designed to connect practitioners and enable climate adaptation. CanAdapt was created to help practitioners across various sectors access tools, training, and connections that make adaptation more actionable. Through the development of various practitioner networks, CanAdapt will be a key contributor towards meeting specific national adaptation strategy goals and objectives. The Mining Practitioner Network is planned as one of several practitioner networks under CanAdapt and specifically focuses on supporting professionals in the mining sector as they integrate adaptation and resilience into their strategies. Think of CanAdapt as your shared workspace, a digital home for the people doing adaptation work across Canada. Everything on the platform is organized around three ideas: learn, connect, and adapt. And the functionalities underneath are all the ones that help practitioners grow skills, become a community, and activate solutions. Features include practitioner networks, resource libraries, forums, events, courses, and collaboration opportunities, all powered by a smart AI concierge service. It's designed to be interactive and practitioner-driven. Members can access curated content and contribute their own insights. Whether you're looking for tools, training, or peer exchange, CanAdapt offers a space to grow your practice and connect with others doing similar work. As mentioned previously, Canada's mining sector is already facing growing risks from climate change. From extreme weather disrupting operations to shifting demand patterns, infrastructure vulnerabilities, and evolving regulatory pressures. The Mining Practitioner Network is an emergent national community for mining professionals who want to work together to build a climate resilient mining future for Canada, connecting people, knowledge, and innovation to turn adaptation into action. The Mining Practitioner Network is a part of CanAdapt, which is a national platform designed to connect practitioners and accelerate climate adaptation and low carbon resilience across sector. Within that ecosystem, the Mining Practitioner Network serves as a sector-specific hub for collaboration, learning, and innovation. The Mining Practitioner Network exists to help practitioners move from awareness to action by connecting them to the right people, knowledge, and tools. It's designed to make adaptation practical, collaborative, and embedded in day-to-day mining decision-making. ensuring the sector can not only withstand future challenges, but also lead in creating a low carbon, climate resilient future. To become a dynamic national community for professionals, we've outlined 6 core goals that guide our work. First, we're focused on building sectoral capacity. Through curated learning pathways, peer exchange, and applied training, the Mining Practitioner Network will support professional development and help practitioners build competencies in climate adaptation. Second, we're committed to continuous learning. The Practitioner Network will hold structured knowledge exchange activities, including virtual events, curated content, and peer-led forums to support ongoing upskilling across Canada's mining workforce. Third, we aim to catalyze implementation by connecting practitioners with funding, research, and project opportunities. These partnerships will help scale up transformative initiatives that enhance climate resilience across the mining sector. Fourth, we aim to strengthen policy and practice by engaging with practitioners and policymakers. The goal is to ensure that emerging insights, tools, and innovations inform adaptive governance and regulatory framework that are responsive to climate risks. Fifth, we're creating a vibrant forum for cross-sectoral dialogue and knowledge mobilization. The Mining PN will enable the co-creation and sharing of actionable strategies to tackle climate-related challenges with a strong emphasis on climate resilience building. Finally, and this is a key area of focus, we want to support and advance dialogue around high-priority sectoral needs. This includes tracking progress on initiatives like the National Adaptation Strategy and major infrastructure projects that are foundational to Canada's climate resilience. We're exploring ways to measure impact, identify gaps, and embed adaptation and low carbon resilience into decision-making processes. The PN is open to a wide range of professionals, innovators, academics, industry, Indigenous organizations, civil society organizations, regulatory bodies, policymakers, and more. It's designed to be inclusive and cross-sectoral. If your work touches mining and climate adaptation, there's a place for you in this network. We're building a diverse community that reflects the complexity of the sector. This slide represents the art of the possible, a vision of the many ways the Mining Practitioner Network can deliver value to its members and the sector at large, and how the Canada platform and ecosystem of services can support them. When we talk about advancing workforce upskilling and sectoral capacity, we're trying to address a skills gap, whether it's in assessing climate risks, integrating adaptation into planning, or navigating new tools and regulations. We envision the practitioner network curating a sector-specific training and course portal, mapping competencies, and helping members find relevant learning opportunities. When talking about continuous learning and professional development, to keep engagement fresh and timely, we can propose monthly themed discussion forums to enable continuous learning and professional development. You might imagine each month tackling a different challenge, adaptation finance, equity in mining, and so on. To catalyze implementation through strategic partnerships, one of the most powerful things the practitioner network can do is to help turn good ideas into funding action. That means using the space to connect with funders and implementation partners, government programs, associations, or non-governmental organizations. When talking about strengthening evidence-informed policy and practice, we need to keep in mind that policy and regulation are evolving quickly. Adaptation, resilience mandates, disclosure requirements. Practitioners need a place to make sense of it all. The PN could host policy roundtables with regulators, practitioners, and others. These aren't just one-way information sessions, but a space to surface practitioner insights that can inform policy development. When talking about collaborative innovation and knowledge mobilization, we can see that another huge opportunity is using the practitioner network to spotlight innovation, new tools, research approaches, and that all of these that make knowledge actionable. Think webinars, exchanges, or co-creation workshops. We can help identify cutting edge projects or invite early adopters to share insights. And finally, when speaking of advancing progress on high priority sectoral needs, we need to be responsive to what's top of mind in the sector. We can do this through member surveys and horizon scanning, and then direct the PN's efforts towards those priorities, whether they relate to nation building projects, emerging technologies, or new adaptation standards. So this is the menu, but not the limit. These ideas are starting points for the PN. When talking about membership to this emergent PN, membership would be open and free. When talking about governance, the Mining Practitioner Network will have an expert advisory group at its core that will guide and oversee the strategic direction of the mining PN. Finally, the CanAdapt team provides operational support on oversight, engagement, and logistics. That brings us to the end of the slide deck on the Mining Practitioner Network on CanAdapt. Thank you for joining us today. As we continue to build and shape this emergent PN, we encourage you to stay up to date on canadapt.network so you may receive news and announcements on when you can join this PN.
Hey, sorry if that was really low and difficult to hear. Sharman and I did do quite a bit of troubleshooting before starting the webinar, so we did try. My apologies. Hopefully you got most of that. It's a little bit confusing, I guess, but CanAdapt you can think of as the big platform, right? It's this big community virtual ecosystem. And then within CanAdapt, we are hosting a number of online communities, and that may be networks, so the Mining Practitioner Network, and that's, covers all topics that fall under mining. Whereas the peer learning group that I talked about focuses specifically on adaptation implementation in mining. So, and they're connected. That's what's really kind of great about the Canada platform is you can easily connect to all the different communities. You can cross post, you can see what's happening in all the groups, and you get updates delivered to your inbox. So just a little additional note there. Okay, and now we actually have some polling questions about the online communities. Just have 4 questions this time. The first question is, how familiar are you with the Advancing Implementation Online Peer Learning Group? I'm already a member. I've heard about it, but haven't joined. This is my first time hearing about it. If you have heard about it and you haven't joined, please, I would love to hear what might be holding you back. Myself and Niharika are certainly available to walk you through the process if that would help as well. In 10 seconds. Okay. So the majority of you, it's the first time you're hearing about it. That's wonderful. That also means that you're new to the webinar series. So if you haven't joined on our previous ones, we love to have new folks joining us. Alright. How would you prefer to share your experiences in an online peer learning group? So if we recently launched the online peer learning group officially. That was the first webinar in this series in early October. So it's fresh and shiny, and we are really looking to hear from users what they would like to see and how they benefit from it as well. Okay. Um, Interesting. So all of the above, informal drop-in sessions, written posts and discussions, short presentations. And of course, Zoom's a little limited, so please feel free to elaborate in the chat. And you can send a private message to myself or Charmin too, if you prefer. Question 3. What would motivate you to participate in this peer learning group? Is it learning from peers, sharing your own work, networking opportunities, access to new tools, resources, recognition or collaboration opportunities? Oh, sorry, this is a rank. So this is a highly motivated, somewhat motivated, not motivated for all of those options. So learning from peers, that's great. Um, Sharing my own work, networking opportunities, access to new tools and resources. Okay, great. Okay, very interesting. So we'll combine these results with our previous polling and post the findings on the network. And final question, imagine this community 1 year from now. What would make you say it's been useful and worth your time? Hmm, Sorry, 1 second. There we go. Ten more seconds. So some examples that we heard here from people is the knowledge that they've gained, that they learned how to do a better job assessing risk and creating adaptation plans, learning and networking, um, that it's making media headlines and gaining traction from governments. Interesting. Okay, that's our polling. So we'll keep chugging along here. Thanks for your participation. All right. Just get you to advance the slide if possible. Thanks. Perfect. Great. Okay, I'd like to provide some more details on the catalog and the development of it because it's a really important piece in the project. So in the first year, we set out to develop this catalog. It's a catalog of implementation drivers, enablers, and barriers. And we started by developing a framework to categorize and characterize the drivers, enablers, and barriers. And to do this, we conducted a comprehensive literature review, which we will also repeat at a smaller scale to see if there's any additional literature that's been published, simply because it's quite an unpublished topic. We found, even the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, this advisory governing body on climate change. Even they didn't have clear definitions. And often what we found was drivers and enablers, the definitions were used interchangeably, or those words were used interchangeably. So as we'll get to, we set out to assign and develop our own definitions. And in the catalog, it considers different types and categories, so institutional, financial, technical, and governance types of DEBs. And we link them to types of adaptation that they influence, including physical measures and management practices. And then also what you'll come to learn is really important is that we documented the contextual details. So things like geography, equity considerations, and so forth. And then after that, set out to populate the catalog. And to do that, we identified 30 examples of adaptation initiatives. Our A key source for this was the Canada's map of adaptation actions. I'll put the link in the chat box. It's a wonderful resource if you haven't already accessed it before. It has a map of Canada, and there's, I think, 300 different case studies of adaptation in different stages as well, in different sectors. So we just simply filtered by the 3 sectors of interest, focused on those in the implementation phase, and use that to populate our own case studies with information headings from within the framework. And so as we reviewed them, we pulled out what we thought were drivers, enablers, and barriers in each of those adaptation case studies. And the outcome of that is our preliminary list. We have a preliminary list of drivers, enablers, and barriers, and that list is changing every day because currently, as I mentioned, we're in the validation phase. So when we reviewed those case studies, they didn't explicitly say what the drivers, enablers, and barriers were. So we did that work ourselves. And so now we're connecting with the authors or the proponents of those case studies to ensure that what we analyzed and pulled out is accurate. It's also, some of these case studies are older, so we're looking to see if there's any additional information that's come about since it was published. So as you can imagine, the list is ever changing. This webinar series will also sort of shape the list as well, and our further engagement will too. So. All right. So what did we do for definitions? Well, what we're really talking about when we say drivers, enablers, and barriers are the forces that shape how adaptation moves from plans to action. So drivers here we consider to be the motivators, the factors or pressures that push us to act, things like new policies, funding programs, or climate impacts. Enablers are what we consider to be the supports, the things that make action possible. They turn drivers into action. Things like partnership, knowledge capacity, and tools. And then barriers, of course, are the obstacles that get in the way. Lack of resources, unclear mandates, or competing priorities that slow or block progress. And we think, understanding these depths really help us to see what's working, what's missing, and where we can focus efforts to accelerate implementation. And some examples in the mining sector of DEBs. So, driver, we're thinking what's pushing adaptation implementation forward? In the mining sector, similar to energy and forestry, increasing frequency and severity of extreme weather events, so wildfires, floods, droughts, permafrost thaw, these are all factors motivating mining companies, regulators, and investors to adopt climate adaptation measures. And these will be things like strengthening site infrastructure, improving water management systems, uh, things that we mentioned in previous slides. But now what makes adaptation implementation possible? What are the enablers? In mining, there's also similar to the other sectors, access to funding, data, and technical guidance. Research initiatives, industry collaboration is also helping the mining sector act. We see a lot of partnerships with Indigenous governments, local communities, and research institutions. Um, and these might focus on projects that are focused on, upgraded tailing facilities or more adaptive water management systems. And then barriers, what's holding implementation back? Well, we're seeing limited staff capacity, competing operational and financial priorities, and a lack of long-term climate performance data. That's another example, making it difficult for mining companies to plan, fund, and evaluate measures. Now, you might have heard me say that funding is a driver, or funding is also an enabler. Well, how can that be? There is a distinction. As a driver, we could think of funding as what is motivating or triggering the action. So, for example, when a new grant or incentive creates pressure or opportunity for organizations to move from planning to implementation, they may say, "We're acting now because funding is available." But as an enabler, funding can support or sustain the work, right? So they may ask, we can implement this because we have the financial means. In short, think of driver as the motivation to act and enabler as the means to act. Um, so yeah, really funding can play both roles. It just depends on whether it's the reason action begins or the support that allows it to happen. Another Another one to cover are drivers or barriers. In our findings, we note that quite a number of drivers are also showing up as barriers. And so at a high level, at a high level category, those read the same, funding. But it's all about the context. So when you start to read the details of the context around it, you begin to see the difference. As a driver, for instance, let's take climate impacts as the driver here. So in mining, increasing extreme rainfall and flooding risk might drive the mining company to upgrade their systems or reinforce their tailing storage facilities. But then climate impacts may also be acting as a barrier, right? Because same factor can simultaneously make action more difficult or even risky. Um, at a mining operation, flooding risk um, might motivate the adaptation, but storm damage could block access to roads. It could disrupt supply chains, or even site evacuations can strain the budget and limit staff capacity. So that would slow the ability to implement the same adaptation measures that motivated the work in the first place. All right, let's look at some of our findings. So these are our preliminary findings that make up the catalog. Um, So for drivers, this slide shows the findings from all three focus sectors. And we identified 9 key areas that span 28 distinct types of factors that are pushing adaptation implementation forward. Some of these are environmental, like I mentioned, so increasing frequency of climate hazards or extreme events. Others are economic, like market competitiveness or funding opportunities. There are also geographic and operational drivers. So, for instance, location-specific risks or the need to modernize aging infrastructure. In the case of mining, there's quite one that's popping up frequently as well as something called legacy infrastructure, or you may hear of abandoned mines. And so that's one example that would fall under geographic. Other ones are in the technological category. So things like there's better data and forecasting tools. In the social and cultural category, this includes partnerships and collaboration. Ecosystem co-benefits is also emerging as strong motivators. Organizations and companies are recognizing the value of skilled teams and nature-based solutions that deliver both environmental and community gains. So these drivers show that adaptation isn't motivated by a single factor. So there very rarely did our case studies only identify one single driver. There were usually a mix of pressures and opportunities. And so if we look at just the mining sector case studies, this is what the results are of 10 case studies focused in the mining sector. For all 10, every one of them identified climate and environmental factors as a core driver. Mm, Like we mentioned, mining operations are directly exposed to climate impacts. And so these on-the-ground risks are really forcing companies to act to protect worker safety, reduce downtime, and maintain regulatory compliance. Policy, regulatory, and governance also was a common area. Um, Governance frameworks showed to be a strong driver. Um, Corporate ESG reporting requirements were also cited as key motivators. And then we also had economics, so economic considerations such as cost avoidance or protecting assets, maintaining investor confidence also showed up as major drivers. Okay, and then I'll just show you a specific example. So one of the case studies was Victoria Gold's Eagle Gold project in Yukon. And this is a strong example of how the drivers we just discussed are playing out in practice. At Eagle Gold, the primary driver was the clear and growing set of climate and environmental risks. Permafrost degradation, changing precipitation patterns, and increased flood events in the Yukon were directly threatening infrastructure stability, access roads, and water management systems. These are on-the-ground realities that pushed the company to act early. This reflects the trend actually that we saw across all 10 case studies, that climate and environmental pressures are the universal driver of adaptation in mining so far. And then um, what else? On this one, so this case study also showed how policy and governments frameworks played a role. So as a relatively new mine, Eagle Gold operated under modern regulatory expectations, and their corporate sustainability commitments emphasized resilience and environmental responsibility. So by integrating climate modeling, permafrost monitoring, and hydrological planning into the mine's life cycle, they considered it not just good practice, but it aligned with regulatory guidance and their strategic ESG objectives. Okay, enablers. So for going back to all three sectors, we identified 6 key areas and 22 types of enablers. At the governance level, for example, strong leadership and coordination showed up. Financial and under financial enablers, things like funding incentives and investment tools. Knowledge and data also provided localized insights and best practices. And on the people side, capacity building, collaboration, and a supportive culture really showed to drive collective momentum. So together, these enablers form the backbone of successful adaptation. They help to create the conditions that allow good ideas to become lasting and on the ground. Okay, and then for mining, this slide summarizes the key enablers or factors that make adaptation implementation possible based on the 10 case studies across Canada. So while drivers create the motivation, enablers provide the capacity and tools needed to move from planning to action. The most frequently cited enabler was knowledge, data, and tools. This was mentioned in nearly every case study. Um, Access to reliable climate data, local monitoring system, and analytical tools was also critical to inform decisions and guide adaptive management. Mining operations that had site-specific monitoring and the ability to interpret changing conditions were far more successful in implementing adaptation measures than those without those tools and data. So, for instance, at Victoria Gold's Eagle project, continuous permafrost and hydrology monitoring enabled the company to track their changes in real time. This data collection provided insight that they need to adjust operations and maintain resilience. All right, we're going to turn to you for some questions via Mentimeter. So there's the slide that shows the instructions for how to access it. Head to menti.com. That's menti.com. And you'll enter the code 26156981. That's 26156981. Post that in the chat. And then Sharman, I'll get you to share your Mentimeter window. All right, so our first question is, which part of the mining sector best represents your work or experience? Note that this list is not exhaustive. So we have one in exploration and resource development, mine closure, reclamation, and environmental management, mining services and equipment, and 3 in other. Okay, thanks. And try the next question. How well supported do you feel in implementing adaptation measures within your organization? Not supported at all, somewhat supported, and fully supported. Okay, so the majority feel somewhat supported. Great. Mm. Next question. In terms of drivers, what do you see as the strongest driver pushing adaptation implementation in Canada's mining sector? So that's your thinking about the mining sector as a whole, what you've observed, what you've experienced. Okay, so policy, regulatory, and governance. That's the number one driver seen for this group. Good. Okay, next question. What's the biggest driver pushing adaptation forward in your experience? So this is what you've experienced. So this is a short answer. Some of you have gone ahead, that's fine. So we heard policy, funding, regulation, stakeholders, policy, funding. Okay. Regulations. Hmm. Okay. Next question. For enablers, which of the following type of support is needed to accelerate adaptation implementation in the mining sector? If you had to choose one. Long-term funding certainty, clear regulatory direction on climate resilience, okay. Okay, super. I think that's it. Oh, no. Which internal factors have most enabled your organization to move from planning to implementation? And we provided 5 there for you to choose from. Mm. So it looks like dedicated funding or budget line is the most frequent internal factor chosen by the group. Great. And I think that's it for the mentee. Thanks for participating. So now we'll head back to the slides and we'll go over barriers, our findings for barriers, and then we will jump back to Menti to ask you some questions on barriers. And then we'll wrap up. I'll wrap up a bit early. I put all the screen sharing on Charmin's shoulders today. Thank you, Charmin. All right. So, in terms of barriers, what we found across the three sectors were 31 distinct barriers. Some are environmental, like we've mentioned quite a few times, things like increasing climate hazards or degraded ecosystems, geographic and biophysical constraints, so remote or rugged terrain and uneven regional capacity also is limiting what's feasible on the ground. And then, of course, economic and financial barriers. So the high upfront costs, short-term funding cycles, and limited investment continue to be a major challenge, as do infrastructure and technical limitations. Barriers in the mining sector that we found. So this slide shows the list that we found in the mining sector specifically. Um, so while the sector is making progress, there are some recurring challenges which show where additional support, capacity, and investment are still needed. The most frequently cited identified barrier was gaps in data research and application. That was noted in almost every case study. Mining companies often face limited access to localized climate data, especially in northern and remote regions where long-term meteorological records are sparse. So without reliable projections, it's really hard to model permafrost thaw and hydrological shifts and extreme weather patterns, which are really critical to mine design and risk management. In the Victoria Gold example, this did show up as a constraint, right? So that the scarcity of high quality long-term climate and permafrost data in the Yukon, it limited the precision of the company's climate modeling. It made it harder for them to plan confidently for future conditions. Even with strong monitoring systems in place, the uncertainty remained high. So this demonstrates the need for greater investment in regional data networks and applied research. Costs and uncertainty were also major barriers. So adaptation often requires upfront investment for things like infrastructure upgrades and monitoring systems. It can be difficult for mining companies to justify when the benefits may only materialize in the future years. So for mining companies with short project life cycles, balancing immediate economic objectives with those long-term resilience goals can be really challenging. At Eagle Gold, for example, the relatively short operating life of the mine created trade-offs in how much to invest in climate adaptation. For them, it was difficult to determine how far into the future to plan and how much to spend on measures for climate events that had not yet occurred. And several case studies also cited the physical and technical limitations of existing infrastructure. Older mine sites and legacy systems, like I mentioned, were often not designed with future climate extremes in mind. So that can make retrofits costly and also really logistically complex. Ironically, the same climate events that drive adaptation also showed to disrupt operations and slow implementation. So this tends to create a reactive cycle where immediate crises take precedence over long-term planned adaptation work. All right. Um, Jump back into Menti. Thanks, Charmin. We'll finish off our questions on barriers. Wrap up the session. And while Charmin's doing that, I'm going to post the link to our mining survey. We would really appreciate it if you would take the time to complete it and also distribute it throughout your networks. This information is really critical for our findings. All right, barriers. Which barrier most often slows or blocks adaptation implementation in Canada's mining sector? It's in your opinion. Climate impacts and environmental risks, economic and financial constraints, infrastructure limitations, and technical constraints. Knowledge capacity and others. Great. Okay, next question. What's one real-world obstacle that slows or blocks adaptation implementation in your organization? How could these barriers be reduced or removed? Not an easy question. The correct funding as I work in the municipal world. Funding budget. Mhm. Policies that are so stringent that they impede practicality. Political atmosphere, regulatory oversight. Yes. Mhm. Wonderful. Thanks, everyone. Okay, next question. Which area feels most relevant to your work today? Drivers, enablers, or barriers? So drivers and barriers. Okay, barriers are coming. Okay, drivers and barriers. What's one new insight or example you'll take back from today's discussion? Okay, different types of drivers, enablers in the mining sector. Mm, Thanks. Thanks to the person for writing that. Okay, I think that's all the questions. Yeah, great. All right, so we'll wrap up a little early today. I don't see any questions, but are there any questions from today's presentation? Enter them in the chat box. You're also welcome to contact me or Charmin. Um, and how to stay involved. So this is the final webinar in this series, but based on some of the feedback we've received, I could see us holding those informal virtual meetings or get-togethers for members of the peer learning group to just show up and just talk about their work. I think we're hearing that that's valuable to a lot of people. Um, and of course, please respond to our survey. We've had some great responses for our energy and forestry sectors. But mining is lagging a little, so we're extending the deadline a little bit longer. And please, if you can, take some time to fill it out. Of course, join us on the online peer learning group. And my email is on the next slide. Shoot me an email, and yeah, we're really happy to have you on here, and we look forward to talking more. Thank you, Sherman, for your support and your excellent, exhausting screen sharing. And thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your day.